Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof, for the 4th of March 2024. It's genuinely good to talk to you. Thank you for choosing this channel to come and get your Ukraine war news from. Awesome of you to do so. Right, we're going to go first to the US because there's a lot of talk going on with regard to that $60 billion plus aid package that's still yet to have passed Congress. It's now been about 5 months since the US has given meaningful aid, other outside of sort of the odd bit of presidential drawdown. This aid package, the lack of this aid package has caused tangible problems for the Ukrainians on the front line. In fact, you could say they lost Avdiivka as a result of this aid package not getting through, and the Russians and their aviation carb bombs hammering away at the Ukrainians there. So a mixture of those two, I think. So that's why we spend a lot of time talking about it. Well, CNN reports that the $60 billion in aid to Ukraine will be voted on by mid-March or early April. Some people are going, yeah, finally, excellent. Other people are going, you what? That's still like weeks to a month plus away. This is like serious stuff, and it's still being kicked into the long grass. So different ways of interpreting this. According to journalists, despite the opposition of Trumpists, some Democrats and the possible resignation from the post of Speaker Mike Johnson will put the updated project to a vote. So there's all sorts of political machinations taking place within the Congress. There's threats to Speaker Johnson for putting the bill to the vote from certain MAGA Republicans, but then other people are saying, look, if you don't put it to the vote, we won't support you, and you could end up being vacated anyway. So your seat could be vacated anyway. So there's threats from both sides, and then there are some rumors that Democrats are saying, look, if it comes to the vote, we will support you, so put the bill on the floor now. So yeah, all sorts going on. At the same time, the EU, very formally, the EU ambassador here saying of the $60 billion aid bill in Congress that's been stalled, she is urging approval, saying Ukrainian people are fighting for Western values and Putin must not outlast his support. There's all this pressure internationally on Mike Johnson as a single individual. No report says here, Speaker Mike Johnson has met privately with House Republicans to discuss a new bipartisan foreign aid package for Ukraine with House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCaul, who's a good Republican, who's very pro-Ukraine, leading the effort. While Johnson hasn't taken a position yet, proponents believe he will allow the bill to come to the floor after the government funding legislation is finalised. So that's after like the full package of keeping the government open in terms of budget is agreed upon. The proposed $66 billion military aid plan includes border restrictions and has been met with GOP divisions. Proponents hope to act swiftly given Russia's gains in Ukraine, but significant challenges remain in securing bipartisan support. It could come to the floor via a vote late March or April. Now, I'm not sure what he means about the idea of including border restrictions. I don't know if that's a new House version or whether he's referring back to previous iterations of this. But this is an ongoing thing that's rumbling on there. As I said, there are rumours today that there could be significant budging, that Johnson is under pressure from all sorts of different angles. Timothy Snyder, the historian and Ukrainian advocate, massive Ukrainian advocate, it says in his piece, The Apocalypse We Choose, Mike Johnson's record as Speaker of the House, quote, Johnson's term of office consists of stratagems to avoid funding Ukraine. It's just consistently, how can we not fund Ukraine? He and a minority of Trumpist Republicans have left Ukrainians without the means to defend themselves and enabled Russian aggressors to retake Ukrainian territory. As a result, troops are killed and disabled every day. When history looks back on this whole kind of phase of the war, I think it'll be clear that every decision that's been made by people like Mike Johnson and by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Donald Trump even, I think the evaluation will be everything that has been decided by these people has been to the benefit of Vladimir Putin. This is only to the benefit of a dictator. Yeah, they might argue about border controls here and there, but in the grand scheme of things, these people are puppets of puppets. And I think that's what, I think it may be what he might be Phillips O'Brien, it might be Timothy Snyder elsewhere, says, Mike Johnson is a puppet of Trump and Trump is a puppet of Putin. These are puppets of puppets. And they're all having their strings pulled, back in Moscow. What's interesting here, and good news for American support to Ukraine, is that 59% of Americans support the provision of additional economic and military support to Ukraine, according to a Times Siena poll. And that is really significant because that's quite a good majority, but it's also economic and military support. 59% of Americans want additional support. And that really goes against this minority position of these minority Republicans. And that's what's so frustrating here, is that the will of the people is not being reflected in Congress. And so therefore, there is something wrong with democracy here. If a single human being, Mike Johnson here, has the ability to table a bill or not to do that, and that is against the will of the majority of people, as according to surveys at least, in the US, then we have democratic mechanistic issues. Right. It's perhaps underappreciated how badly the GOP's antics over Ukraine are screwing over American workers and investors. So a further problem here with regard to the aid bill and with regard to the provision of military equipment to Ukraine is that shares in the biggest military contractors to the Pentagon have shed most of their gains after Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. Lockheed Martin has lost 10% in the past year, and RTX, formerly Raytheon, has declined by 9%. So I'm not trying to advocate for military-industrial complex entities making astounding profits on the back of war, right? However, it is necessary that when nations are at war, given the modern scenario of defense industries being a mixture of state-owned enterprises and private enterprises, it is just the case then that when you're at war, these companies who are making equipment of war will make money. It's just the way it goes, unfortunately. We don't want that. What I don't think, as in we don't want war, what I don't think happens, which is what many kind of conspiracy theorists advocate for, or not advocate for, like claim is the case, is that these industrial military complex entities drive war, that somehow they lobby politicians and it's them making decisions to go to war. There's kind of conspiracy theory thinking that, there's no profit in peace, and so they actually go to war on the behest of these corporations, right? But actually that's not what happens. And interestingly, in peacetime, these entities make greater profits, because the bigger profit making projects are things like the F-35, right? That's like a 20, 30-year project, and R&D makes gazillions of spondoolies, and that is your big money maker. And these act predominantly as deterrents. But actually, when it comes to making shells, the unit cost or the profits on those and those items that are the kind of bread and butter of warfare don't command an awful lot of profit. And so, yes, there will be profits coming out for industrial concerns in manufacturing them, but it's not to the tune of, say, an F-35 project and single pieces of selling an F-35 to another nation around the world. That's what makes the big money. Anyway, I digress. By contrast, shares in Leonardo of Italy have jumped 91%, while those of Germany's Rheinmetall have rallied 78%. So the European economies, certainly concerning the industrial military complex, are doing well out of political decisions to support Ukraine to a much greater extent than the US is presently doing. So European industrial concerns are benefiting more than American at the moment, and so that's another component of the overall argument as to whether the US should support Ukraine or not with that aid bill. Now, Wall Street Journal has come out with a big article on how US chips are flowing to Russia via China, via Central Asia. And again, it's this idea that it's so difficult to regulate the manufacture and export of this stuff when you are making a chip that gets sold to X to Y to Z within the US and then goes out to Central Asia, and then from Central Asia goes to China, and then from China goes to Russia. Like, how do you stop that happening? No one's breaking the rules until you get to, say, China, and the US can't regulate China. So how do you effectively, I mean, I'm sure it can be done, it's just very tricky to do so. Right, we're now going to go to look at, sorry, messing around here too much, to look at France. And before we get on to France, France's aid that they have sent over the course of the war, as much more has been made public in the last 24 hours, I thought this was very, very important, really. Anyway, as Mina Allender says, so it's not just empty talk from Macron. The idea that Macron is just full of rhetoric but is not following it up. Actually, there is the idea that it is being followed up to some degree, at least. Scholz must absolutely hate anything of this sort. It's been fascinating to see how, in some ways, the French position on Ukraine has evolved considerably, while the German Chancellor has remained consistent for 2 years. I don't know if that's fair. I think Germany has really ramped up support massively of Ukraine over the course of the war and has tried to step in where the US has stepped back. But France is also leading the way at the moment, and that rhetoric is being backed up by some meaningful changes. So, quote, this is Arnaud Castagnev quoting from a Politico article. France's chief of defense staff has written to his NATO colleagues exploring possibility of a coalition of the willing to take over tasks from Ukraine, including manning defensive systems, training forces in country, cyber operations, and help in demining. This is huge. So this is now not just Macron saying something and then being criticized for that and saying, actually, my words are weighed and they're well thought out and considered. In other words, I wasn't just spouting off, this is genuinely thought over what I mean. But actually that is being backed up by a letter to NATO colleagues saying, we really need to consider how we use our troops, and can we get a coalition of forces into Ukraine in order to help out the Ukrainians so they can divert attention to the front line of their own troops, and we can help Ukraine to win this war. Now, interesting, Germany said no to this off the bat, but the reason why Germany said no to this is because it would require Germany to change their law in Parliament to do so. Because of the Second World War, they have laws that they can't send foreign troops out in certain situations. So it's much more difficult for Germany to do what France is suggesting here, which is partly why Scholz was very not up for giving tourists, because if he deems it necessary that German programmers have to be on the ground in Ukraine, then you would have to change the law in Germany about that. So the whole tourist thing becomes a much more involved process, right? Where you are then saying to Germany, and by the way, so France and UK have given Storm Shadows and Scalps, and then on the sly sent off some programmers to Germany or whatever, some forces to Germany to help deliver those missile systems. And we can do that because we don't have to change anything in Parliament to do that. Whereas Germany is written into their constitution, or whatever their rules, that if they were to do that, they would have to get that passed in Parliament. And to get that passed in Parliament is to communicate directly to Russia that we are sending troops to Ukraine, because in order to do that, we have to change it. We have to pass that through, the Bundestag or whatever, and therefore it's a lot more difficult. Now, Germany, I think, is going to be obviously saying no to this, but if France can get a coalition, we've already seen the Baltic states, we've seen Canada be up for this. Britain has kind of formally said they're not, but we are already doing it anyway. So this would be fantastic if you can get a coalition of forces that can be sent to Ukraine to help them out in different ways. This was discussed on a very long Tochny, very good live stream last night, where they discussed this and then talk about how, if this happens, so say there's a training area in the west of Ukraine that's set aside for for coalition forces to train Ukrainian soldiers in Ukraine, which would be a lot cheaper, a lot less hassle for the Ukrainians, because it's expensive for them to send their troops abroad, and all the logistics sorted out. And that you keep them in Ukraine, train them in Ukraine with all those NATO trainers, and then they can get to the front line much quicker. This would be fantastic. However, if you did that, you would have to secure you'd have to secure the airspace over that area. So there'd have to be Patriots brought in, SAMP-T, whatever it is. You would need, and that's fantastic. So, but it's a lot more difficult than saying, oh yeah, let's send a bunch of our troops to help out over there. You would need to guarantee their safety. Although I think that would be a net benefit to Ukraine. So it's fantastic that France is leading on this. It really, really is. Now, France has also published a list of military aid delivered to Ukraine over the last 2 years. Information about missile supplies, so the Scalp-EG remain classified, so they didn't say anything about the numbers there. According to the published document, by December the 31st, so this is admittedly 2 months plus ago, Paris had allocated just over 2.6 billion euros directly for military aid, and also 1.2 billion to the European Peace Foundation. So that's about 3.8 billion, which is broadly what Le Monde reported previously when they said, actually, we have sent this much stuff. The total list of weapons amounted to 50 items, which included armoured vehicles. So that's 50 different things, not 50 total weapons, 50 different types of weapons, including armoured vehicles, artillery shells, air defence equipment, boats, and other. So France has done a bunch of stuff that people possibly haven't been recognising them for. The question is whether that's still enough. Open question. I would say that they could have done more and should have done more, and we all could have done and should have done more. This won't silence critics of the monetary value of the French military aid, of course, says Sophie Peder, to Ukraine, but it is the first time, after repeatedly refusing to do so, that France has listed its support, bar Scalp. So what do we have here? We have, oh my goodness, it's in French. You got your, I'll tell you what, I'll see if I can get a translation of that. But you've got transport vehicles, so those are trucks, camions, GBC 186 of those trucks. Nautique, so that's going to be amphibious vehicles. 30, unless that's like boats. Don't know about the Zodiac Futura. That could be a boat, actually. So you've got a whole bunch of fuel trucks by the looks of it, and fuel itself possibly. 30,000 cubic meters, 150 tons of petrol products. So yeah, you've got small caliber, small arms ammunition, a lot of that, and then grenades and so on and so forth. And 155mm shells for Caesar, and the TRF-1, which is a howitzer, so they've sent 30,000, and then 9,105mm, slightly different caliber for the AMX-10 RCs, those wheeled light tanks. Scalps, confidential. Frequency scanners, 100. Iridium posts, so another kind of comms piece of equipment, 30 of them. Drone detection units, 10 of them. Reconnaissance drones, 160. Then we've got electronic warfare kits, I think two of them. Okay, let's go to small arms, small caliber. No, we'll go to the next one, which might tell us a little bit more. Optics. Okay, artillery. So we've got TRF-1. These are howitzers, 6 howitzers, 30 Caesars, LRU-4 mortars, 120mm mortars, which are the rifled mortars that have pretty good range and accuracy, 10 of those. Then you've got the Kratal. These are air defense systems, 2 of those Kratals with a confidential amount of missiles sent. CM200 radar, 1 of those. A Mistral system, by the looks of it, 6 of those sent. SAMP-T, 1 of those sent, and the missiles for those all confidential. Then MX-10 RC, the light tanks on wheels, 38. 250 APCs. And I don't know what the VLTT P4 is, but 120 of whatever they are. So there's your list of equipment, good stuff. And then to add to that, by the way, the French Ministry of Defense has paid for the modernization of Ukrainian fighter jets for French high-precision AASM aerial bombs. These are basically like your glided guide bombs, as far as I can work out, but from the French. And also deliver the first batch of 50 out of 600 pieces. So they're going to deliver 50 per month to the Ukrainians, and the first 50 have been delivered. So I assume the Ukrainians can use these right now. And the French have paid for the upgrade of the planes for that. So France is stepping up, and behind the rhetoric is also action with regard to getting a coalition of troops out to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's government was reaching an agreement with the US tech company Palantir to accelerate demining through the use of artificial intelligence. The agreement entails a digitalization of demining operations and automation of processes, according to the economy's ministry's press release. In Ukraine, a production of analogues of Western M113, so that's the old school tracked APC, the Max Pro, which is a mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle, and the Humvee, that's a light version thereof, was established. These analogues are called Lysycach and Charakternik. So here we have images of Ukrainian versions, and I actually saw the Ukrainian version of the Humvee out in Ukraine when I was out there. So they are kicking about. Quite often we're like, oh, that's Humvee. No, it's not. It's a Ukrainian one. There are international equivalents of the Humvee as well, so it's quite difficult to work out exactly what you're seeing. But it's not always the Humvee. Right, with regard to Russian equipment and personnel, foreign volunteers and mercenaries serving in the Russian army military during training, well, here the cameraman gives the commands to in English to, quote, Nepalese, Vietnamese blacks. So they're telling, that's how they're, commanding these different people, which goes to show that there appears to be a growing contingent of foreign fighters in Ukraine fighting for the Russians, and that's an advantage the Russians have, is that they don't have to just rely on their own mobilization internally, domestically. Now, speaking of which, Zelensky, and this is a very important Washington Post article that talks about possibly the biggest issue for Ukrainians outside the US aid package. You could argue it's even bigger than the US aid package. So Zelensky's in a bind over how to draft more troops as Russian forces advance. So let's dip into this article. Zelensky's inability to forge a political consensus on a mobilization strategy, despite months of warning about a severe shortage of qualified troops on the front, has fueled deep divisions in Ukraine's parliament and more broadly in Ukrainian society. It has left the military relying on a hodgepodge of recruiting efforts and sown panic among fighting-age men, some of whom have gone into hiding, worried that they will be drafted into an ill-equipped army and sent to certain death given that aid for Ukraine remains stalled in Washington. Right. I was speaking to Greg the other night. He's saying Khmelnytsky is amazing. You drive around the streets and you see hardly any young men because they're afraid to go out. They go out, there's a chance of them being mobilized, right? And so that's kind of natural human tendency. If you haven't volunteered already for the war, it means that even though you might think you might very strongly be in defense of what Ukraine are doing and very strongly trying to support the Ukraine armed forces, you just don't want to give yourself a really high probability of being injured or killed. And that's a natural human thing. Like, it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, if I was in that situation, I'd volunteer to go to the front line. I feel really strongly about that. I would go and do that. And when it actually comes down to it, well, would we? I mean, I don't know is the simple answer for me personally. Or would you do things like, right, I'm going to go and try and become a drone operator or someone that sits back behind the front lines doing like more geeky stuff rather than running at the enemy with a machine gun? So, how would you react in these different situations? So Zelensky faces an issue that if he mobilizes, does a mass mobilization, then those people get taken out of the economy, morale of society drops, lots of people run away from Ukraine abroad. We saw that in Russia and we saw that in Ukraine as well, which is why it's illegal to do so, but they're consistently catching people at the border, trying to get into Moldova, trying to get into Romania and all these kind of places. So that would happen, which would then also affect the economy. So not only do you taking people out of the economy and putting them on the front line, but you're losing people running away from the economy. And that really affects your ability to sustain a country, economically speaking. And instead of earning money here and paying taxes into the economy, you're taking them out, so you're not getting the taxes, and then you're paying their wages and then paying compensation if they get injured or killed to their families. It's super expensive. So taking them out, putting them there has a double whammy cost to the economy. And also, it's deeply, deeply unpopular, although it's absolutely necessary, right? If you do that, then your PR ratings will go down as well. So this is what is keeping, I presume these are the reasons that are keeping Zelensky from doing the necessary but very uncomfortable action of mobilizing. So the quandary over how to fill the ranks has confronted Zelensky with perhaps the greatest challenge of his leadership since the start of the 2022 invasion. The lack of clear mobilization strategy or even agreement on how many more troops Ukraine needs factored into Zelensky's dismissal of his top general in February. But the new commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrskyi, so far has brought no new clarity. However, he has done a few good things. So he has been tasked with auditing the existing armed forces to find more combat-eligible troops, which he has done, and found a load of troops behind the front lines that have never been to the front line. There's no rotation effectively going on. So that has been found out, which is, I think, a good thing going forward. After Zelensky's office recently announced that of the 1 million people who have been mobilized, only about 300,000 have fought at the front lines. But nearly a month after his promotion, no one in the military leadership or the presidential administration has explained where those 700,000 are or what they've been doing. Ukrainian law, I can explain largely. I went through umpteen checkpoints. You've got HR, you've got administration back behind. You've got logistics. You've got people working on, refueling. You can argue that, people doing artillery crews. Are they on the front line? Well, technically they are, and they are susceptible to be hit by drones. But, all these different types of troops that are at different stages further back from the zero line, they are doing things. And you go to military administration in cities, and you see lots of military in cities. Yeah, they're not always fighting all the time. Soldiers, they will have rotations, but you go around and you see military all over the shop, and they're not all fighting, right? So yeah, quite what they're doing we can argue about, but there certainly needs to be a better, I believe, rotation. Ukrainian lawmakers say the lack of a unified message from the president and the military has added confusion over the next steps. Quote, I don't know why Zelensky or his team still try to convince society that everything is always fine, said Slomia Bobrovska, a lawmaker from Holos, a liberal opposition party. It's not, especially with the army. Ukraine's dwindling number of battle-ready troops is now a strategic crisis that was at least partially to blame for its recent retreat from the eastern city of Avdiivka and surrounding villages, where Ukrainian forces were far outnumbered. Yes and no. I think the other issues with the lack of artillery ammunition and the Russian use of aviation were the main reasons there. But after 2 years of all-out war, the sense of public urgency that spurred to go back to that point, the idea that just more troops could have stopped them would have meant more troops dying. But you don't stop oncoming troops with human beings with machine guns. You stop oncoming troops with artillery. And it's that simple, or aviation. And so that's why Avdiivka was taken. So I'd actually massively disagree with that. Now, before I was like, no, I definitely disagree with that. Anyway, after 2 years of all-out war, the sense of public urgency that spurred new troops to the battlefield and fueled Ukraine's early successes have faded. Many soldiers are wounded or exhausted. Some of them have been fighting for 2 years non-stop, a couple of days off here and there. And you're like, they just don't have the ability to continue doing that. Goodness me, the mental and physical exhaustion would be phenomenal. For all this time, men between the ages of 18 and 60 have been banned from leaving the country, and men 27 and older have been eligible to be drafted, with some exceptions. Civilians between 18 and 27 can sign up on their own. Parliament has now spent months heatedly debating a bill that would change the mobilisation process and widen the scope of the draft, in part by lowering the eligibility age to 25. More than 4,000 amendments have been made to the mobilisation bill, with some lawmakers seeing the measure as an attempt by Zelensky to pass off responsibility to Parliament for an inevitably unpopular decision. Zelensky has long tried to control public messaging through the state of the war to preserve public morale. He publicly announced a death toll for Ukrainian troops for the first time last weekend, saying that 31,000 have been killed since February 2022, a number that could not be independently confirmed. The hint here from the author is that 31,000 was definitely at the low end of the realistic spectrum of deaths for Ukraine, and I think a lot of people kind of accept that. Zelensky is also facing mounting pessimism at home and abroad about Ukraine's chances of holding off the Russian onslaught without more help from the US. House Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to take up legislation that includes some $60 billion in aid for Ukraine. So this is obviously a big issue as well, and it's trying to manage all of this, the PR concerning all of this stuff, so that people don't lose their morale too fundamentally within Ukraine. But then if everyone thinks it's all fine and dandy, then you don't have that pressure to get troops to the front line. So this is really interesting trade-off. Ariev voted against, so this is a Ukrainian politician, against an earlier draft of the mobilisation bill that he deemed too punitive. He opposes measures like suspending driver's licences and seizing bank assets of citizens who do not register for the draft. In January, fearing such measures, account holders rushed to withdraw their money, taking out more than $700 million in a single month, the most withdrawn since February 2022. This is the effect mobilisation will have, like right across the economy and society. The priority, Ariev said, should be to, quote, guarantee to people who will be mobilised for military service that they will not be sent to the front line without training and without proper equipment. Is really scaring people that creates a lack of trust in the government. Greg was talking about this, Greg and Zhenya, about how they need to look after the families, demobilisation and compensation for family members, and welfare that is larger than just payment for the troops. We'll also make sure that payment is consistent and people are paying, not having to pay out their own pocket for stuff. I met plenty of troops who rent houses for their troops to live in near the front line, who pay for their own units, equipment, and so on and so forth. So these things then stop the attraction of signing up for the war effort. Those fears are driving some draft eligible men to take evasive steps. The article goes on to talk about people sort of trying to run away. Yaroslav Yarishchin, a member of parliament from the Holos party, said lawmakers are seeking, quote, an appropriate motivation mechanism. So you need to attract people to encourage enlistment, including bonuses for destroying Russian equipment and new financial benefits for veterans. It's a hard discussion because previously we mobilized people who had this feeling of duty, he said. Now we must motivate our people to serve in the army. So how do you get people to want to sign up who have already shown that they don't want to sign up, given that we're 2 years into a war? Bezhevets, the advisor for the defense ministry, said the country has a future up to a moment where there are people who are ready to fight for it and to die for it. I don't like to die for it as a kind of phrase. It's better to kill for it, he added. But despite the existential threat to Ukraine, many civilians, he said, are just dust in the wind. And that is the huge challenge facing Zelensky and the Ukrainian government. Right, moving on to geopolitical topics. This is Medvedev, who's dressed in a kind of Xi Jinping style tunic, a Kim Jong-un style tunic, actually. Speaking to a Russian audience, I've already referred to this morning, saying that he stated that Russia has no borders, like its empire stretches on unendingly. So as Ilya Ponomarenko, the Ukrainian journalist, says, but NATO expansion, but all Ukrainians are Nazis, but proxy war, but money laundering, but Ukrainian aggression. They've been saying this loud and clear. This war is about the complete elimination of Ukraine as a nation. So you can have people like Elon Musk and David Sachs talking about all these kind of things over there, like, oh, it's all because of NATO expansion. And then you got Medvedev telling you really what's going on, that there are no borders to Russia, and then this. The more vocal Russians are about this, the more funny, or shall I say sickening and enraging it is to see paid Kremlin stooges and useful idiots, Musk, etc., spinning around with their mental gymnastics to make lame-ass attempts to justify what is simply the biggest European war of conquest since World War II. Right, So this is the. Let's listen to what Medvedev is telling an audience of people clapping him for saying this. If the Kremlin's intentions weren't already clear enough, here's a former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev saying today that the concept of an independent Ukrainian identity must disappear for good. Quote, one of Ukraine's former leaders once said that Ukraine isn't Russia, says Medvedev. That concept must disappear for good. Ukraine is undoubtedly Russia. Clap, 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 clap. In other words, there is no Ukraine independent from Russia, and that's what this is all about. Meanwhile, Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokeswoman, has said denazification in Germany is not complete. In other words, the end of the Second World War, we haven't finished here. If the Germans do not change the situation, the consequences for Germany will be dire. That appears to be Russia threatening Germany in a kind of World War II style manner. This is big, right? And we need to wake up and smell the coffee about what the Russians are trying to do. Now, to track this back to American aid and what's going on in American politics, it's worth noting that although Nikki Haley has lost the primaries to date in these different states as to who will be the presidential candidate for who will be nominated to a run against Joe Biden in the presidential election in November 2024. And all of these states have voted for Trump, but they've done so at sort of like 70% levels, there or thereabouts, sometimes like 75, almost 80. But you've got 20 to 30 and sometimes more % of Republicans are rejecting Donald Trump. And many of those are saying that they would not vote for him in a presidential election. As I keep saying, when it comes to November 2024, if he's not got unity in the Republican Party, he's not going to get the independents and he's not going to get some of the swing voters from the Democrats. He needs to build a coalition, if you like, or it's kind of like a unified voice that attracts most of the people in America. And at the moment, Nikki Haley, she has now won her first primary, so she won overwhelmingly in Washington. Now, Trump has spent a long time slagging off Washington, so there's no surprise that this is the one she gets. But 19 delegates are looking like they're going to go to Nikki Haley. Now, that was a really big win percentage-wise. I think it's around 60-something %, almost 70% of people voted for Nikki Haley, if I remember correctly. So that is a big kick in the teeth for Trump. If he needs those voters in November, and it's unlikely he's going to get them all, then his chances of winning in November are somewhat less. Now, why do I keep talking about this? Because actually November elections are it's hugely important for what takes place in Ukraine and support to Ukraine on an ongoing basis. If Trump gets in November, then there is no guarantee that the US will continue to support Ukraine. It's that simple as far as I'm concerned. Now, Timothy Snyder says, I've been thinking something like this. The weaker Trump is, the more he needs his Russian backers. But while they can shape minds and anger the angry, they can't really get people who don't like Trump to the ballot box. They're not the right pros for the US general election. This is a really important point. So it just goes on to what it's just saying, that you're not going to get this broader support for you, Trump, if you're going to go down this route. But the problem is, if you go down this route, you'll rely more on support from, say, Russia, and that will make you weaker and weaker and make you require going more down that route. It's like a vicious cycle. Russia has more pressing needs of its own than Trump's victory. Sure, they need him to win in November to win in Ukraine, but they're doing so badly they need him to stop Ukraine funding now, which is unpopular and makes Trump look like a puppet, and Johnson a puppet's puppet, which I talked about previously. So what's he talking about? Well, it's a very long thread. I'm not going to go through it, but it's from the editorial board that is really interesting and talks about the issue of Trump not having his base, and talks about these primaries, exactly what it's talking about. Nikki Haley eating into that support that he has, and then not coming out and saying the right thing. And basically, his entire campaigning is devoid of policy. If you listen to all the things he said in South Carolina, North Carolina, what was it? Was it Virginia? Like, his speeches are like he's having some issues, like cognitively and whatnot. So that's an issue in and of itself. But actually, if you listen to the content of what he says, there is no substance. He spends all his time slagging people off, and he doesn't present any policy. There's no manifesto. There's no like, this is America's great, right? You guys are good. You're good people, but we're going to make you better. It's like, America's terrible. It's all terrible. These guys are idiots. You're an idiot. You're a sucker. Bird brain, Nikki Haley, and like childish attacks on people, right? There's no policy. It's like, this is genuinely what we're going to do to solve the border issue. This is genuinely what we're going to do. And here's some detail to put on. Yeah, I can be rhetorical, but I'm going to back that rhetorical flourish up with some actual substance. There is just no substance. And so what that means is he's just very divisive, and he's very negative about other people. And then if he's slagging off Nikki Haley and her supporters, then when it comes to Trump getting the eventual win there for the GOP, he's alienated them so much that they won't vote for him in the November elections, and so on and so forth. So it's really interesting. Lots of fascinating stuff in this big old thread. And he says, so he cares about defeating his enemies, to be sure, especially Joe Biden, whose administration is victimizing him. But actual problems, no, he doesn't care. Problems are for exploiting to gain power to liquidate enemies, not for solving. Republicans who are good at politics, and this is really good, and there are many of you out there who are listening who are Republicans who are good at politics and who are urging him to pivot to the general election, also know who their party's presumptive nominee is. He can't adjust. He won't adjust. He's running the same campaign in 2024 that he ran in 2016. Only it's 1,000 times more dictatorial. Even when coaxed into adjusting, he reverts to form. During an interview involving a question about government secrets found at Mar-a-Lago, Hannity suggested that he wouldn't really commit crimes, would he? In essence, Trump said, sure, I would. That's that famous interview recently. All the above is why Trump needs the Russians. His base is shrinking. He's alienating the female independent suburban voter. He can't adjust, won't adjust. He doesn't care about problems enough to solve them. All he can do, the one thing he's good at, is hold steady while the Russians, in coordination with the Republicans, attack Biden, smear him, wear his people down, quote, flood the zone with shit, as advisor Steve Bannon once said in a nihilistic act of voter suppression. Indeed, as Rachel Maddow pointed out recently, she's written a book on Russian disinformation stuff. In 2024 will be the third election cycle in a row in which Vladimir Putin's saboteurs are once again against attacking American sovereignty and interfering with our democratic decision making. Meanwhile, GOP leaders will either stand by and watch it happen, as Mitch McConnell did in 2016, or participate, as the Republicans are now doing in pursuing an impeachment inquiry. Or a bogus case invented in Moscow, as some put it. Russian sabotage of American sovereignty has become a practical necessity, made more terrible by the fact that Trump and the GOP are willing to do anything to win, even openly conspire with a foreign enemy that spent scores of decades trying to sabotage American sovereignty. But a devil's bargain comes at a price. In this case, the transmogrification of the Republican Party, it used to be a place where that female independent suburban voter felt at home, not anymore. Since 2015, the Kremlin has waged endless information warfare against the US, and the Republicans have, over that period, internalized practically all of it. They were not victims, they were hungry for lies. The result is a party that's not only aggressively anti-women, it has stopped being one of the great bulwarks against Russian aggression in Europe. So where the Republican Party used to be, it's not where it is now. According to the same Associated Press report, quote, it's official, the age of a small government, hawkish Republican Party appears to have ended. End quote. However, most Republicans support ending aid to Ukraine and preserving domestic programs is only half the story. Since the fall of Roe v. Wade, states run by Republicans have become increasingly Russian in practice. They've banned books. This is true. They have banned books. They've censored speech. They've outlawed history. All of this is true. Suppressed individual expression and, therefore, individual liberty. If they have not used the power of the state to control their populations, they have empowered snitches and vigilantes to reach the same goal. Trump is the weakest presidential candidate of our lifetimes. He needs the Russians. Republicans who are good at politics know this. They also know that the more he accepts Russian aid, the more Russian aid will change the party, making it unrecognizable to that female independent suburban voter who is now leaving the party and making their way towards the Democrats or independents or just third party candidates. So yeah, really interesting stuff there. Now, talking about political leaders, Phillips O'Brien says this is an example of a political leader not operating under Russian reflexive control. Excellently phrased, Russian reflexive control of Western escalation concerns makes many of Ukraine's backers smaller than they are, and Russia seem more powerful. What he means by that is, if we pander to nuclear escalation and that kind of rhetoric, then we are just allowing Russia to control the narrative, and we become reflexive leaders. Our leaders become reactive to Russia rather than driving the narrative and driving decision making. We become pawns in the Russian game. And if our leaders, like Olaf Scholz, are saying, "Oh, we won't do that because I'm afraid of this," or Jake Sullivan and Biden's administration saying, "Oh, we're not going to do this because it'd be escalatory," then you are playing their game and they are not playing your game. Whereas someone like Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas is becoming this really strong, vocally strong leader. That is bucking that trend. Quote, "We should not be afraid of our own power and should not overestimate Russia's power. The fear of escalation leads us to make ourselves smaller than we are." And that is wrong. I mean, this is brilliant. And there are lots of people saying that, look, she was really overlooked as a potential leader of NATO, and that Mark Rutte from Netherlands, taking on that role potentially is at the expense of, someone who's shown themselves to be really strong. Maybe Frederiksen from Denmark as well in the running there. But then there are other people saying that the reason they chose Mark Rutte is because if Trump gets in November 2024, then it would be much more useful to have a male leader in the role of NATO and Secretary General. And Mark Rutte stood up to Trump before quite publicly. So there's lots of dynamics going on there. Anyway, Lithuanian defense minister has visited the US to meet the Pentagon chief. That's really good news. The Baltics are very much involved in everything that's going on in support of Ukraine at the moment. So meeting Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to discuss bilateral security cooperation and military support for Ukraine. Former head of Russian propaganda network Sputnik Lithuania, again sticking on Lithuania, confirms that they foment riots in European countries, specifically mentioning an operation in Lithuania and the Yellow Vest in France. So if you remember the Gilets jaunes, that big protest in France, Paris and France, a couple of years ago, when the French, they love a protest, but it's a bit like the Polish farmers. It's like, oh, why are you getting so up in arms at the moment? Who's driving this? Okay, you do have some genuine issues, but you'll find it's fomented by the Russians. It's either partly funded or the information landscape is sculpted by the Kremlin such that it facilitates these protests. So there might be genuine issues here, but Russia is fanning the flames of protests for sure. Russian propagandists are appendages of a terrorist state that should be prosecuted as such. This is absolutely on point. And as someone here says, the West really needs to get a clue when it comes to this activity. Such active measures should also come with appropriate sentencing guidelines for prosecution. I'm really happy that people have come to me today and said, thank you for convincing me to watch Winter on Fire, the Netflix documentary, which is now on YouTube for free. It's really amazing. It's so powerful. Thanks for that recommendation. Please go out, all of you go out and watch that. But if you want to watch something else that's incredibly important to watch Active Measures on Amazon Prime, which is the way that Russia has become involved in US politics. Watch that. It's one of the most information dense documentaries I've ever watched, and it should give you the absolute it should worry you. And this is this is the idea here. The West really needs to get a clue when it comes to this activity. Russia is freaking good at active measures. It's got decades and decades of experience. And it's doing better than the US and the West are doing at the moment in that information battle. From Soviet flags to TikTok, and again, we're going to continue on this front here. How Russia poisons Italy across generations. So a Euromaidan article here that looks at 30 years after the Soviet collapse, its symbols and distorted history resurface in Italy as Russian propaganda sways youth online. Some bizarre cases that are mentioned in that article in this thread. So if you're Italian, you might know of Gianfranco Pagliarulo, and he heads the Italian National Association of Partisans, a World War II legacy group. He urges Italy to halt military aid to Ukraine. His pro-peace partisans march with Soviet flags, propagating dubious narratives of Ukraine Nazism. They hold influence and receive Italian state funding. Andrea Lucidi began reporting from Russian-occupied part of Ukraine, displaying Z invasion symbols in 2022. He calls Ukraine a Nazi regime and denies Russia's Bucha massacre. Lucidi posted a fake execution video of a hanged doll, claiming to show a Ukrainian killed priest. And Irina Osipova, daughter of a Russian diplomat in Italy, fiercely opposed Ukraine until 2018 when she disappeared. She now works for Italian Senate with access to sensitive information. In 2014, she visited Moscow, and now Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini, who's a massive pro-Russian advocate and against Ukraine aid, and he's one of the leaders in the coalition in charge of the country at the moment, and has ties with Russian neo-Nazis. That is, Osipova does. So there are these people who are being very clearly followed by some in the open source intelligence community and mainstream media outlets. You can track this stuff, but these people are using social media to generate support for Russia and generate either antipathy generate antipathy for Ukraine. TikTok, as Hillary Clinton said in the recent Munich Security Conference chat, she said TikTok is owned by the Chinese and has 100 times pro-Russian channels on there than pro-Ukrainian. And there is a tool that the Russians are using very, very successfully. Within 2 weeks, the European Commission could already provide an official proposal regarding the use of windfall profits of frozen Russian assets for the benefit of Ukraine. It's possible that the money will go to the procurement of military equipment first. Quote, "We've been saying that windfall profits should be used for the reconstruction of Ukraine, but there needs to be a country to reconstruct in the first place. So such a step would make absolute sense," an EU diplomat has said. So brilliant if that can happen sooner rather than later, even if it's just the profits skimmed off the top of those frozen assets. If you can use that to buy military equipment for Ukraine, then that's brilliant. Official said that Poland holds informal talks with the EU on exemptions for farmers. Warsaw is conducting informal negotiations with the European Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen, on granting Polish farmers possible exemptions on the EU's Green Deal. This is concerning the blockades on the Polish-Ukrainian borders. Now, interestingly, my fingers are pressing things unnecessarily. No cases of blocking weapons, military equipment, or humanitarian aid or fuel for Ukraine have been recorded on the Polish border, says Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. I'm not sure that's been the case. I mean, I've literally seen pictures of equipment that has been held up on the border in those long queues, but maybe no formal complaints have been made. Maybe Shmyhal doesn't want to make this any worse than it already is, so he's trying to downplay the issue. Anyway, potentially good news for the Ukrainians in that respect. Russian media has said Moscow has summoned the German ambassador following alleged leaks. So this is unsurprising. Good that Olaf Scholz has done this. The Russian Foreign Ministry has summoned... Oh, sorry. No, this is the other way around. I misread this earlier. That's what happens when I read things too quickly. Moscow has summoned the German ambassador following the leaks of the German military personnel talking about destruction of the Kerch Bridge. So the Russian Foreign Ministry has summoned German ambassador to Russia to give an explanation. Well, personally, I think there should be Russian ambassadors to Germany summoned for those leaks. What are you doing recording our generals speaking? Now, Ukrainergo, the Ukrainian energy concern, has planned record electricity exports to 5 countries. It's on the back of the Ukrainians surviving the winter period solely on Ukrainian gas with no imports. So that's good. And now they're planning to export to 5 countries. A record 13 gigawatt hours of electricity to Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Moldova today. That's absolutely amazing. And that's the kind of thing that you want if Ukraine is to sustain itself as an ongoing economic concern. Today, it's planned to export a record amount of electricity with a maximum capacity in individual hours up to 716 megawatts. Ukraine will not renew the gas transit contract with Russia. So they have gas going from Russia through to Europe by pipeline. Ukraine will not renew the gas transit contract with Russia. This is our basic position. So although you might think that's highly controversial, that actually Europe needs that and Ukraine needs to fulfill contracts and blah, blah, blah. But once that contract comes to an end, then, at the same time, we're talking with European partners about their transit needs after the contract is over, and we're waiting for the EU's position. It could be that they could export some of their own gas, maybe. I don't know. I don't know enough about their production of gas, but yeah, interesting. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Sorry that was a long one. Take care. Speak soon.